Hello, welcome to another edition of Oklahoma Politics and Youth. Thank you for joining us tonight. Gary Cooper is my co-host, and I'm Steve Byas. Our guest this evening is Mitchell Shaw, who is the North Texas coordinator and Oklahoma coordinator of the John Birch Society. Towards the very end of the Second World War, John Birch was an American military officer in China who was killed by Chinese communists. As far as we know, he was the very first American to be killed by communists. Mitchell, thank you for being with us this evening.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Glad to be here.
And and then Robert Welch, a candy manufacturer,
Indeed,
decided to start an organization, and he decided to name it after John Birch. I'll just kind of start off here, tell you a little story that back in the early 1960s. My mother was talking to our neighbor over the fence. You know, back in the days when people would talk to their neighbors, over the fence. And they got to talking about a local, the doctors in town, and a local physician was a member of the John Birch. In fact, he was the leader of the John Birch Society in Duncan. And this neighbor, he said, well, I wouldn't go to Dr. Beasley because he's a John Bircher. And my mother, just to be kind of coy, said, well, exactly what is a John Bircher? And the guy stood there a second and said, I really don't know. So you're here tonight to tell us what a John Bircher is.
I actually still run into a good number of those folks. I was at a straw poll for the Republican Party in Fort Worth, Texas, just a few weeks back, and I got a lot of folks, people that are below the age of about 50. A lot of them have either never heard of the John Birch Society or they've heard of us, but they only have sort of a vague idea of who we are. And I typically tend to explain it, Steve, by saying that we're a constitutionalist organization, an Americanist organization, dedicated to teaching people first about the Constitution, informing folks about the Constitution, about the proper role of government under the Constitution, and about certain subversive organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations and the United Nations that attempt to subvert our sovereignty and freedoms. So a large part of what we do is our goal, and Robert Welch's goal in founding the society, is to create an informed electorate. So we're not a partisan organization, either Republican or Democrat, and that's a little bit liberating because when people ask me, well, Mitch, are you a Republican or a Democrat? I say, no, and they scratch their heads for a minute, and then I say, well, we're constitutionalists. And I typically, like to let people know we're what I call equal opportunity conservatives. We held Bill Clinton's feet to the fire for 8 years over his socialist policies, and we're not going to give George W. Bush a free pass either. If his policies make sense, well, then we'll say so, and when his policies don't make sense, we're going to say so.
Okay. Back when Welch started the John Birch Society in the late 1950s, most people associated the John Birch Society, when they think about it, it was anti-communist organization. But really, it's broader than just anti-communist.
Indeed.
You were kind of alluding to that. Kind of expand on that a little bit.
Well, we're what we call an Americanist organization. We're not afraid to say that as Americans, we probably ought to put America first. When you apply for a job, the employer wants to know, well, I know what's in it for you to come to work for us, but tell me what's in it for us to hire you. Well, we tend to say, well, we ought to deal with that. When it comes to immigration, we ought to ask ourselves, well, what do you bring to the table? We bring America to the table. What do you bring to the table? Let's put America first. Let's put America first in our military. We ought not be spreading ourselves awfully thin all over the world, policing all of the world's little squabbles. We could bring those same soldiers home, defend our own borders, and put a stop to the illegal immigration issue if we really wanted to.
If we really wanted to. I think we'll probably be getting more into the illegal immigration. That's probably the hottest topic
Very hot
in the
right
United
now.
States at this time. Robert Welch was the first chairman, that was his title, of the John Birch Society. Tell us just briefly about who was Robert Welch.
Robert, if you've ever eaten sugar...
Was it wild-eyed bomb thrower?
No. If you've ever eaten sugar babies or sugar daddies, you can thank Robert Welch for them. He invented those. Robert Welch was, by anyone's estimation, an absolute genius. By the age of 12, he had read a several-volume Annals of the World History And Robert Welch had something of a photographic memory. So I want you to imagine spending your entire adult life guided by a real understanding of history that you've carried in your mind since you were 7 years old. So coming into adulthood, Robert Welch was able to kind of understand some things that a lot of his peers probably missed, and he began, once the candy company really took off and he was somewhat wealthy, to devote time and resources to sort of researching some of the things. What's wrong with America? What's going on? And he began to initially see a lot of communist influence in the State Department and some other areas, and ask himself, what can be done about this? And then as he began to examine it further, came across the story of John Birch and decided to form an organization and name it after Captain Birch. Again, after having obtained permission from Captain Birch's family, he named it the John Birch Society because he did see John as the first victim of the Cold War.
Yes, okay. And I've also heard that he had played the world chess champion to a draw. Had you ever heard that story?
I've never heard that
before?
one, but it doesn't surprise me. Some of the stories that I've heard.
He must have been a very smart man.
We publish a book called the Blue Book that is, I don't know how many pages, but it's a good inch or so thick. This is a speech that he delivered over 2 days on December 7th and 8th of 1958 when he founded the John Birch Society. So he was an extremely intelligent fella, really understood what was going on in the world and had a real vision for what ought to be done about it. One of the things that kind of separates the John Birch Society from a lot of other organizations out there, and there are a lot of great organizations, we are indeed a grassroots organization, but not in the sense that most people think in terms of a grassroots organization, in that we are chapter-based. We have chapters in cities all over the country, and that's where the work of the society is done, and we can talk about that as we get into this.
We're going to talk about the structure here in just a second.
Okay.
And then your second chairman was Congressman Larry McDonald.
Larry McDonald, who unfortunately
was murdered by the Soviet Union.
Also murdered by the Soviet Union, shot down in KAL 007, Korean airline. A lot of mystery surrounding that, but
to this day.
And what's interesting is he was a sitting U.S. congressman at the same time that he was the chairman of the John Birch Society. So the leader of the John Birch Society and a sitting U.S. congressman is shot down by Soviet MiGs over the ocean, and there was no outrage from our State Department. Oh, there was a little bit of saber rattling, but no real investigation, nothing ever really.
And I remember at the time they said, well, that's just coincidental that he was on the airplane. But as I remember, Senator Jesse Helms, Congressman Philip Crane, and Senator
Don Nichols,
Steve Sims were all supposed to be on that same plane with McDonald,
also.
but they took a separate flight. Now that's strange credulity to believe that was just coincidental. I mean, they could have killed four at one time.
That's right.
Anti-communists. Okay. Gary, ask our guest a few questions here.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, let's talk a little more about what the society does. Now, a lot of times there's different kinds of conservative organizations that are all based in Washington, and typically when a person writes a check to an organization like, there's all kinds of organizations in Washington.
And we typically refer to those as letterhead organizations.
Letterhead organization. They send out a fundraising letter.
They're a post office box and a letterhead.
50 to 90% of the funds for the organization are absorbed in just collecting it. They then pay some lobbyists. They put out some press releases, etc. And that's pretty much it. Now, the society is not like that. Let's take an issue like illegal immigration, which is a key issue. Well, most of your letterhead organizations put out bulletins in the news, they put out a press release, they have some speeches on TV. That's pretty much it. What does the society do on an organization like that, and how is that different?
Well, and illegal immigration is a great issue to tackle that with. Let's look at the difference between the John Birch Society and, like you say, a group that would just hire a lobbyist. We don't have lobbyists. We're not a lobbying group. We're actually chartered as an educational organization because Mr. Welch understood that the way to save America is to create what he called an informed electorate. The problem in America, like it or not, is not on Capitol Hill. It's on Main Street. It's that the average American doesn't even understand our system of government, and that's by design. Now, you take the illegal immigration issue, what would we do on that? We're not a lobbying organization, so as a staff member of the JBS, I'm not going to go talk to your congressman. He's not my congressman. If I go talk to him and try to sway his vote on an issue, I'm lobbying. What I do instead is I inform you about that issue in an attempt to draw you into the John Birch Society, and then continue to inform you about those issues, and you go and talk to your congressman. It's very effective. You go talk to him, write him letters. We do very extensive letter writing campaigns, both to congressmen and editors of newspapers and magazines, in an attempt to sort of get our message out there about what ought to be done. We do introduce on our website, www.jbs.org, stands for John Birch Society, jbs.org. We'll introduce resolutions where a person can print that out and take that to their congressman or mail that into their congressman and say, hey, here's a resolution, or here's something you ought to consider putting forth as a bill. Now, that's not lobbying because it's being done by our membership, and they're addressing their own congressman.
Well, I know one of the things you often, at least from my perspective as a conservative, lament is the fact that so much is done in Washington when, as you point out, there's a need for informing people at the local level. So like on immigration, for example, you know, what would be nice is to have people actually, speakers actually coming locally and do that. Now, that's what you folks do.
And in fact, we're going to have a speaker coming in. We have a national spokesperson on illegal immigration. His name is Sam Antonio.
What a name.
What a name, but that's for real. Sam is a great guy who's going to be coming in actually December 8th, which is a Saturday. We're going to be doing a fairly large event in Oklahoma City at the Character First Training Center, which is located at 520 West Main Street in downtown Oklahoma City.
Okay.
We're going to be bringing Sam in to speak on the topic of illegal immigration, sort of as a rally to support House Bill 1804,
Right.
Which, you know, there's just been a good bit of hubbub about recently here locally. As a result of that, by the way, and some of your viewers may have actually seen a couple of our members on television, on the news, the day that this law went into effect. Of course, several hundred immigrant rights activists got together to protest. And of course, we asked an interesting question a while back: is it their right to live in our house? Special edition of our magazine that we did, the New American Magazine, special edition that we did on the illegal immigration issue. So several hundred of these immigration rights activists get together to protest the upcoming law, the law that's taking effect that day. Some members of the John Birch Society got out there and presented a petition that had over 2,700 signatures on it to say no amnesty, enforce our laws the way they stand, let's clean up the illegal immigration issue and send these folks back where they belong. So 2,700 names on signed petitions, I think, speaks louder than a handful of folks who all have a vested interest in amnesty.
Right. So basically then what you're doing is with the speaker tour, people speaking, the kind of is to mobilize your members locally to inform their neighbors so that those neighbors in turn can vote intelligently, write their Congress,
creating
make
an
their
informed
voice heard.
electorate, exactly. And in that regard, we are indeed what I would call a grassroots organization. Where I differentiate us from what that means in most people's minds is that we do have national leadership. We have a professionally trained field staff, of which I am part, and that's a little different than certainly most grassroots organizations that are all volunteer-based, and that's fine. I certainly don't mean to disparage those organizations, but what can happen, and one of the things that Robert Welch recognized in 1958 when he founded the John Birch Society, was that a lot of those organizations can get together for a once a week or once a month meeting, and because they all come in as volunteers, they'll debate an issue to death.
And become a debating society.
And can't reach any kind of consensus, and so they call it a night and get back together the next week or the next month and do it all over again. And while their hearts are certainly in it, and these are good patriotic Americans who understand the problem, they don't always understand the solution because there is no leadership. Well, we have leadership out of Appleton, Wisconsin, is where our headquarters is, and I know here in the Southwest, I had a nice lady ask me, can anything good come from the North? But indeed it can. We are based out of Appleton, Wisconsin, but we have a professionally trained field staff made up of major coordinators, which we call regional field directors, who handle quadrants of the United States, and then more to the immediate level, a fellow like me, an area coordinator. I handle North and West Texas, Oklahoma, and the little sliver of Arkansas that is right against Texas and Oklahoma. I work with our chapter leaders. I work to coordinate activities amongst the chapters, to help with recruiting efforts, to help coordinate speeches like this one that's coming up, and basically just to kind of pump some life's blood into the organization and keep things moving once we get it moving. Momentum's a beautiful thing. Once you get it, keep it.
Exactly. Well, now one other question I wanted on a different tack there. Of course, the society has been active since the late 50s, and in fact, it's interesting. I remember Eleanor Schmiel, the head of the National Organization for Women, back when the Equal Rights Amendment finally failed after years of fighting on that, was asked why the ERA failed. And she said, with a great deal of anger in her voice, 3 reasons: Phyllis Schlafly, the Mormon Church, and the John Birch Society. Well, you find yourselves in good company there. And so over the past few years, I know the society was active in the Get Us Out of the United Nations plea when no one was trying to push that.
That's
Now, we can, over the years, we've seen good reasons for that. Let's talk about the sovereignty issue, because I think illegal immigration, that we'd agree, is related to that.
Absolutely.
A lot of Americans have begun to start hearing and understanding a little bit that things are not what they used to be. America isn't as respected and as powerful as it once was, and we find a lot of things going on that our country isn't making the decisions for its own future, as it seems to. Talk a little bit about that, what's behind that, and how the society tries to combat that and defend our sovereignty.
Well, when I defined the John Birch Society earlier, I defined us as an organization that informs people about the Constitution, the proper role of government under the Constitution, and subversive organizations that want to see an end brought to America's sovereignty and their schemes. Because it's not enough to talk about the Council on Foreign Relations. We need to talk about what it is that the Council on Foreign Relations is doing that's so detrimental to our sovereignty and our liberty. One of their most recent subversive schemes is what's called the Security and Prosperity Partnership, which is basically a North American Union. Now that's our term, and I'll be frank and tell you, they're not using the term North American Union. They refer to it as the Security and Prosperity Partnership.
But it would be in effect like a common market for North America, like Europe.
It would be a merger of the United States government with the governments of Canada and Mexico into one regional government with one body of law over those 3 nations under the Security and Prosperity Partnership. Now this is already being implemented. There is a series of NAFTA superhighways that are being built, Trans-Texas Corridor being the first of those, coming up through Lazaro, Cardenas, Mexico.
And that was the whole deal with Mexican trucks coming in uninspected, et
That's
cetera.
right. That's because, and again, you say, well, what has that got to do with national sovereignty? You're talking about illegal immigration. How do those 2 things work together? I'd say a better question would be, why isn't George W. Bush doing anything about the border? And the simple answer to the question is, he is doing something about the border. He's erasing it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to build a fence when you just plan to erase the border and merge 3 nations together anyway. And one of the things that Sam Antonio is going to be talking about when he comes out on December 8th to speak with us is how the North American Union ties together with all of this illegal immigration and why nothing's being done about it from either side of the aisle.
Well, it's interesting. I've often thought that I could see why multinational corporations and people who never have to rub shoulders with their fellow Americans at Walmart would stand to gain financially from no borders. But from the average American, from a crime perspective, a security perspective, terrorism, law, freedom, etc., I can easily see how that would be a nightmare. Tell me then, is this whole thing about raising Mexico and Canada's standards of liberty and freedom and prosperity up to ours, or lowering us down to theirs?
Well, it can't be about raising theirs up to ours, because the best way to do that would be to recognize national sovereignty and encourage the nations around us by example to be the very best nations that they can be. Mexico could be a lot better Mexico. Canada could be a lot better Canada. But when you merge all 3 of these nations together into a forced, amalgamized nation, that's not going to raise anybody's standard of living. So we can't just invite the entire world to America and make everybody rich? Unfortunately not. It doesn't work that way. You can't export liberty either, and we've been trying to do that for some time now. Steve?
You were talking about Sam Antonio coming
Yes.
to Oklahoma City. I didn't catch the time of day that the speech.
That's
is
going to be December 8th at 2 p.m.
2 p.m.
And again, that's going to be at 520 West Main Street, downtown Oklahoma City. That is the Character First Training Center.
Okay.
And that is a Saturday.
And for more information, your viewers can call 348-9991 or visit our website, jbs.org.
Great.
Okay. Okay. One thing that, all of us sitting here are for national sovereignty. I would think Gary is for national sovereignty, you are, and I am. And it's just, we just assume that's a good thing. And I do. Yeah. But tell the people watching the program, why is it important for the United States to remain a sovereign nation? 10 years ago, I didn't think I had to explain to somebody why it's important for us to remain independent and sovereign. But a lot of people probably don't see what difference does it make. Why is it important for the United States to remain a sovereign country?
Well, I would say one of the primary reasons that sovereignty is so important, Steve, is that let's take any given issue that's important to one of your viewers out there. I imagine you've got a lot of gun rights activists,
Yes.
a lot of pro-life activists, a lot of fair tax type guys. There are a lot of these issues.
A lot of small business people believe in free enterprise.
Absolutely. So any of these issues are important. But let's take, for instance, myself. I'm a firearm nut. I just love guns. So let's take the Second Amendment issue, and let's say we're gonna stand or fall on the Second Amendment. Well, if we lose our nation to a North American Union, we don't even get to talk about the Second Amendment anymore. So let's say that my real hot button is protecting the unborn. Well, that's great. You and I can debate that, and I have a pretty good idea that you and I would be on the same side of that issue.
Yeah.
But you probably have some viewers that would differ with us on that, and that's fine. We can at least argue about that. We can at least debate that. In a society where we become a North American Union, we won't even be talking about that. That conversation's off the table.
So the issues are being decided not by voters in Mexico for Mexico, voters in America for America, but by bureaucracy.
By an
Because that's what's happened
unelected,
with Europe and
by
its
an
unification.
unelected bureaucracy. That's exactly right.
One of the things they've talked about federalism in the United States, it's a great laboratory. Each state, one state over here can come up with a solution for certain types of issues. Like on illegal immigration, like Randy Terrell's Bill 1804.
Wonderful bill.
And other states are talking about copying Oklahoma's bill and solutions for other areas. Well, and if you don't like the state that you're living in the United States,
You can vote with your feet.
you can move to another state.
That's right.
It's going to be very difficult if there's a one world government dictating everything.
And you have struck the nail right on the head. Many, many years ago, the architects of this North American Union, the same fellows that have been behind this for quite some time now, and our president, Jack McManus, the president of the John Birch Society, wrote a book several years ago called The Insiders, where he talks about the dominance of the Council on Foreign Relations in administrations from the Carter years to the Reagan years, the Bush years, the Clinton years, and now the Bush years again. We've swerved from the right lane to the left lane, but we've never left that road. We're still headed in the same direction we were headed in under Carter. Sometimes we've gone faster, sometimes we've gone slower, sometimes we've been in the right lane, sometimes we've been in the left lane, but our direction hasn't changed one iota.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're in a car headed toward a cliff going 100 miles per hour, and the more conservative of the two parties wants to slow down to 80. Well, we need to talk about actually coming to a stop, maybe turning around and headed back toward constitutional principles. But these architects of the New World Order have decided that, America loves sovereignty, and we're not going to buy into a one world government if it's called that. So they introduced an idea called regionalization, where they will, quote, make an end run around sovereignty, eroding it bit by bit from behind.
Yeah.
So their plan is to, you've got a European Union, now we'll have a North American Union, maybe an African Union, an Asian Union, and then eventually what would make more sense than one umbrella organization, and the United Nations seems to be tailor-made for that, to come in as a global union or something to that effect.
Okay, we've got a little less than a minute left now. And the one more thing about
Time does
that
fly.
Yeah, it does. People talk about it, the old saying, it's hard to fight City Hall. Well, if you think it's hard to fight City Hall, try to fight a world government. Try to get something changed there.
Absolutely.
And if people are frustrated about getting anything done in their local community or even in their state government, federal government, can you imagine trying to get through and talk to anybody?
Which
The
is why
world
we need to
government.
retain our sovereignty.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, we've got about 30 seconds here left. Tell us, how do people get involved in the John Birch Society in about 10 seconds? What would they do? Well,
They can contact us on our website, jbs.org. There's a wealth of information there. They can, again, call that number that I gave you earlier, 348-9991, and
Okay.
I'd love to meet with anybody who wants to talk about the John Birch
All right,
Society.
thank you for being on the program.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for being with us, and join us next time for another edition of Oklahoma Politics and You.